Hey everyone, Lumineer Franz here. And before we jump into the video about Ryan Miller, here's another small puzzle piece that Artem of Lorcana was able to reveal from the Toy Fair. Here we can see that Artem was able to grab a few pictures from the back of one of the box displays. And on this one we can see that each player needs a 60 card deck of Disney Lorcana cards to play. Disney Lorcana, the first chapter, contains over 200 cards. Based on the wording here, it seems that Lorcana will be played with 60 card decks exactly, no more, no less. This is a commonly used standard deck size in the Western TCG market. Thanks to Artem for giving us this information, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Ryan Miller Part 2.
Welcome back, Illumineers, to the Tavern. I'm Illumineer Greg, and thanks to everyone that watched, commented, shared, or even just dropped a like on our previous video on Ryan Miller. We are so grateful to have gotten a comment from the man himself. We pinned his comment on the first video, but there's one big point that he mentioned that I wish to highlight right here at the start. When looking at Miller's resume on the Chrono Clash website, I mistakenly interpreted the line Duel Masters lead designer as meaning that he designed the game system in the early days of Duel Masters. It turns out that this is not the case, as he was the lead designer of the game from 2012 to 2014 for the Japanese version of the card game. If you wish to read Ryan Miller's full comment, I'll link to the previous videos in the card above. Thanks again to Ryan Miller himself for leaving the comment and enjoying the video. And while we're on the subject of community interaction, can I just say that Ravensburger has absolutely knocked it out of the park when it comes to communication with the community thus far? Not only is the official Lorcana account active on Twitter, but we have also had sightings from lead designer Steve Warner himself with Knives 2 inks per deck reveal. If anyone from Ravensburger ends up watching this video, thank you, and keep up the great work. Alright, so in the previous video on Ryan Miller, I mentioned that if we got to 20 likes, I would release a part 2 covering more of his work in game design. Not only did that happen, but that video has actually gotten over 40 likes. Thank you so much for all of your support. And while we're on the subject, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you like to see regularly uploaded Lorcana content. Oh, and considering that this is a sequel to the last video, it is recommended that you watch the first video we made on Ryan Miller before you watch this one. It is linked above in the cards and in the description. Alright, let's get started. Part 1, Chrono Clash System. The Digimon/Chrono Clash memory system was mentioned as a segment in the last video, but I really don't want to undersell how illustrative Chrono Clash is in particular to Ryan Miller's general design philosophy. There's a really interesting designer interview series from the YouTube channel Kitchen Table Meta, which dives into this game design theory. But first, let's go over the basic system of Chrono Clash itself. As per usual, don't expect a full how to play video here, this is more just to get everyone up to speed about the general design of the game. As a quick recap, there's a Chrono Clash gauge that indicates time. In this system, your time starts at 0. When a card gets played, the gauge shifts over by the card's cost. As soon as the gauge goes past 0, the current player's turn is over, and the other player's turn begins. The biggest draw here is that there's no real restriction to the types of cards that you can play in a turn. As long as it is your turn, and your opponent won't exceed 10 memory from playing your card, then you are free to play basically whatever. This is a really interesting balancing act, as you are allowed to play high-costed cards at basically any time, but it is up to the player to determine when it is most appropriate to do so. Alright, so I'd wager that longtime viewers of the Tavern already know this resource system fairly well. But what else does Chrono Clash have to offer outside of this rather inventive resource system? Let's briefly go over the anatomy of a card first. One of the more unique things about Chrono Clash is the effect of any particular card is not written in text like is found in traditional card games. In Chrono Clash, the card effects are symbols that are performed sequentially in order from left to right. In the top left is the card's cost. This is how many spaces on the Chrono Clash gauge need to move over to play the card. And finally, on the bottom left is the card's power. On some cards, there is a Guardian ability on the bottom right, which I'll go over more when we talk about the Guardian stack. The field itself is pretty simple. It's like Duel Masters with DLC. When taking a look at the playing field, of course, the top indicates the chrono gauge that dictates the back and forth gameplay between you and your opponent. At the top right, we have a space to keep track of how many quest points we have. Front and center is the battlefield where all of our battlers will go. And there's also an extra deck mechanic that stays on the field with jumbo cards called EX battlers. The Guardian stack is something that both Duel Masters and Digimon players will get accustomed to easily. In Chrono Clash, when you declare an attack, you flip over a card from the Guardian stack. First, you check to see if any Guardian abilities are indicated on the bottom right of the card with a shield icon, and if there are, you perform those effects. Then, you compare the power of the attacking battler to the defending character. If the power of the Guardian is greater than yours, your battler gets discarded. Alright Lorcana fans, listen in, because this could either be a major part of Lorcana gameplay, or just one big coincidence. The major downfall of speculative content. In Chrono Clash, you can send your own battlers on quests. To do this, you place a card from your hand on top of a battler face down. This card on top of your battler acts like a guardian. If a turn cycle passes and your opponent has not attacked into this guardian, then you discard the card on top of your battler, and then you gain a quest point. If you have 5 quest points at any given time, you win the game. Does any of this sound familiar to you? If so, your suspicion would be right. A key line from some of the Lorcana promotional material is that we get to go on quests and earn lore. And I don't know about you guys, but to me, going on quests and getting quest points sounds like a very similar sentence. Now, I don't want to go too far into speculation land here, but I'm incredibly interested in seeing if the similarity in systems between games that share the same designer could mean something here. Only time will tell when we get gameplay revealed in spring. As mentioned previously, Kitchen Table Meta made a 3-part gameplay interview series with Ryan Miller before the release of Chrono Clash. There's a lot of interesting clips of Miller's overall design philosophy that I wish to highlight here. If you want to watch the entire series on its own, there are links provided in the description.
One of the things I love about the Guardian system, now I worked on Duel Masters, and so those of you who played will definitely see a parallel, right? This is definitely similar to the Shield system. What I love about this, and it's another good game design concept, and it's called hope. Hope is very important in game design.
Now this is a really interesting quote for us Lorcana fans, as it may indicate a future gameplay mechanic that will make it into the final version of the game. In many trading card games, particularly ones designed in Japan, there's an added version of variance included within the system itself. Outside of the examples of Duel Masters and Chrono Clash given here, this design element can be seen in Cardfight Vanguard, White Schwartz, Warcross, and others. There are definitely some pros and cons to introducing hope, as Miller calls it, into any game system. On one hand, games can be a lot more exciting and not deter new players from playing the game if there's a big skill gap between 2 players. But on the other hand, this added layer of variance could reduce the overall competitive nature of the game. Honestly, when it comes to Lorcana, I could see this going either way. We do know that the game is being designed with accessibility and new players in mind, but as I typically say when it comes with predictions, we will never really know until we get our full reveal.
Because what you really want with the game design itself, just the bare rules, is a skeleton that you can hang a bunch of meat on, right? Okay. And the meat, of course, are the cards and cards abilities and all these other cool things. And the meat, I guess, would be the design space, what we call the design space. And the design space is just all the places you can, all the different types of design cards you can do. And generally, the simpler a game, the smaller its design space, more complex the design space tends to go. Not always. Okay, what are you doing? You killing me here?
No, I just
you got it. Oh, that's even harder. Okay. So, so that's the challenge, and trading card games also have the challenge of you're going to release more cards for them, and so whatever skeleton you make has got to be really robust and really support a lot of that, because otherwise you end up having to add a lot of complexity to the game. I did this with Duel Masters. When I worked on Duel Masters for the Japan market, we often, because that's a really good game, but it's also a very bare bones system, we had to add new card types with their own rules so that we could add more design space going forward.
This quote speaks to the general system of the rulebook itself, which is definitely of great interest to me as a card game fan. Miller specifically refers to the Duel Master system, which was featured in the last video. This claim surprised me at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. At its core, all there is to Duel Masters is a deck of 40 cards, 5 shields, the mana zone, and the battlefield. There isn't a whole lot more to offer with card types either. In the beginning of the game's history, there were just 2 types, creatures and spells. To this end, it makes a lot more sense that the more complex your game is, the more design space there ends up being. So what do we know about the potential design space of Lorcana thus far? Well, we know that there are inks that we can use to summon glimmers, and that's the supposed resource system. There's also challenging, questing, and lore earning. In terms of card types themselves, so far we know of 2. Characters and actions. There may be more to this game than what has currently been revealed, but as of right now, it appears that the overall design space of this game is slightly bigger than Duel Masters. If this is true, this may be the perfect compromise between the very simplistic design of Duel Masters or something super complex that would deter new players from jumping in and joining in on the action. When gameplay finally fully releases for Lorcana, I would love to revisit this design space discussion to see where the game really lands. Part 2, Kaijudo. Alright folks, I've really been looking forward to this section of the video. For those of you who don't know, Kaijudo is a relaunch and reimagining of the Duel Masters franchise lasting from 2012 to 2014, and Ryan Miller just happened to be the lead designer for the game. To explain the basic system of the game, it's basically Duel Masters all over again with only two key differences. First, you are only allowed to play up to 3 copies of a card in your deck, whereas the original Duel Masters allowed you to play up to 4. The second change is that once you play a mana of a certain color, you are free to play creatures of that color for the rest of the game, whereas in the original Duel Masters, you had to tap at least 1 mana of the corresponding color in order to cast it. Both of these changes are rather negligible, to be honest. Only allowing 3 copies of each card per deck isn't a huge deal since the decks can be as small as 40 cards anyway. Of course, as is the case with any card game, there's an interesting history of set releases and metagames that I encourage those who are interested to look into it further. Resources for that are in the description. We won't be talking about any of that in today's video though. Rather, we are gifted for another opportunity to listen to Ryan Miller talk about some interesting quotes in Desire Introspection and the R&D panel for Kaijudo in mid-2014. The full video of this panel can be found in the description, but here are some highlights as brought up by Miller himself.
Much different than what we did before.
Designing a set of cards, you have to kind of put on different hats. You got to look at it through the lens of various types of players. And every format adds another type that you have to look at it through. You know, how is this set for the standard player? How's it for the draft player? How's it for the open player? And that's true of any card game, really. You have to think of how is this for a combo player? How is this for an aggro player? How is this for a control player? Those sorts of things. So I would say if it does change it, it is that it adds another lens for us to look at the set and make sure that we're giving you guys the service you need in those sets for those various.
This quote is probably the most important takeaway for something like Lorcana. Designers seem to know this concept very well. They're designing for so many different types of players when creating any set of cards. This concept already seems to have shown its face in the teasers we have gotten for Lorcana. Separating the game into 6 different inks will give a strong sense of color identity throughout. In other words, there are going to be some things that certain colors do that others don't do as well, if at all. We've already seen this take form with how Ruby will focus on removing characters from the field, whereas Amethyst chooses to exert them instead. For context, this panel happened close to the release of Quest for the Gauntlet, where sets started to be designed for the draft format. This changes the previous 9 cards per pack into 14 cards per pack. So this next clip talks about the changes in the booster pack structure, but could also speak more to what we could expect in the sets if Lorcana is draftable. Take a listen.
A really good thing.
And we talked about draft before I left Wizards over a year ago, or longer probably. We started talking about draft, and I remember Kieran saying we're going to make packs larger, because that's, you know, the first thing you need to do if you want a draftable product. And I was like, yay! And then I was like, oh wait, that means a lot of things. That means a lot of things. And so we had to, you know, raise the set sizes, and for, you know, my concern early on was just design space. Because this game, one of the strengths of this game is that it's really quick to pick up. It's a very easy game to pick up, but there's a lot of depth in the cards and that sort of thing. From a design standpoint, that actually kind of creates some problems because it's very hard to make a simple card in this game. Like, I can make super rares all day. I've made 3 in the few minutes we've been talking, right? But tell me to design a light common, and it's really hard. It's really hard because the simple abilities in this game tend to be really powerful. What's a simple ability that light has? Gain a shield. All right, well, that's very simple, but it's way too powerful, right? So my concern going in is, well, we're going to increase the number of commons. That means that puts more pressure on that part of the design, right? So I was like, you know, it was a tall order.
This part of the panel was pretty eye-opening for me. A lot of the time, card game players take a type of draft format for granted, but that completely undermines the sheer amount of extra time and brainpower that had to have been included with R&D. If it ends up being the case that Lorcana is a draftable product, I can definitely appreciate the effort that must have went into making it a reality. Those were the 2 quotes I wanted to highlight from Miller in this panel, but since I've seen the topic of bans and rotations floating around the social medias, I wanted to discuss this idea with another one of the panelists, Mons Johnson. Johnson is yet another incredible designer who was around at Wizards of the Coast in the early days, and knows Richard Garfield personally, and later helped with sets such as Saviors of Kamigawa, Worldwake, Arch Enemy, Amonkhet, and Hour of Devastation. Needless to say, Johnson also knows what he is talking about when it comes to game design.
With the longevity of a game. First, you can have a rotation where some cards are standard legal for a while, and then they leave, and then new cards come in, and so you'll have which is what we adopted for Kaijudo. You could also ban cards. This actually it works reasonably well. It's not. We preferred rotation for details that I will get into. But for like our Duel Masters game in Japan, that's our basic policy. Yu-Gi-Oh! Obviously also uses that policy of just. All right, this card is a problem. It's a little too powerful. We'll ban it. Reduce the overall power level a smidgen so new cards can rise up. You could also, there's other two things that could happen. One, you could just make cards better and better all the time.
Bad.
How do you feel about that, Mike?
That's not good. And the reason, of course, is that there's an implicit promise in your Andromedas, in your older cards, that they'll still have value because we're going to support Open. And there's still going to be people that want those cards, and there'll still be cards that people will compare the new cards to, say, oh, wow, this card is good, it reminds me of blah. Whereas inflation, you don't have that. You just continually make, and eventually, you end up with one cost speed attacking double breakers, and it's not sustainable at all.
Coming next year.
And then, of course, the other choice is that you don't have inflation, but you continue to print cards, but if they're not better than the best tuned decks of old, no one plays them. No one buys them. That is also bad because you don't have turnover, you don't have change, it's stale. Yes. And so basically the choice is between rotation and banning cards. The reason
I don't know what other types of commentary I could say here other than the fact that this is 100% true. Of course, power creep and not printing good cards are effectively non-options for a trading card game, so I definitely expect to see either a ban list or set rotation at some point in Lorcana's lifespan. And with that, I think that leaves us with a pretty good knowledge base of Miller's past game design involvement, alongside a shining ray of hope that Lorcana will be a card game for the history books. When I get around to doing another one of these designer retrospectives, I think that there's another designer that I haven't talked about nearly enough that deserves some time in the spotlight. Stay tuned. If you like what we do here at the Travers Tavern, please leave us a like, comment, or a subscription, and make sure that you're following us on Twitter for real-time updates and tweets about the state of Lorcana. Alright, stay safe out there, and please come see us again soon at the Travers Tavern.